Start our discussion of the Poison Squad by talking about the modern Food Regulation Agency, the FDA. The Food and Drug Administration ensures that our food and medicine are safe to consume. In fact, their mission statement is as follows. The Food and Drug Administration is responsible for protecting the public health by assuring the safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices. Now let's take a moment to visualize a world where this quintessential organization didn't exist. We may not even have a world due to the toxins that would leak into our foods, killing millions of people each year, at the very least. We would have a pseudo-apocalyptic society. We aren't in that place thanks to the potent efforts of Harvey Wiley and his leadership in the Poison Squad. So who is Harvey Wiley and what is the Poison Squad? Despite their abhorrent title, the Poison Squad actually refers to an organization of roughly a dozen men that combated dangerous food additives enacted by the food companies that were backed by the corrupt United States government. Now the FDA requires all food and medicine in stores to list out the ingredients used and what the major ingredients do, as a form of a safety measure, preventing companies from adding certain chemicals that put the customer at risk. But back then, there was no such federal organization preventing this from happening. Rather, individual state governments were in charge of their own legislation. These additives were kept hidden from the public and were used to preserve food. Once these secrets were unraveled, many of these food additives were found to be detrimental to mankind over extensive periods of time, leading to concern in the scientific community. Many of the additives that used to be prevalent in the 1900s were tested and proven toxic by the Poison Squad, including borax, sulfuric acid, saltpeter, formaldehyde, and copper sulfate. One person who was especially concerned about the impending food crisis was chemist Harvey Wiley, the leader of the Poison Squad. Harvey Wiley went to the United States government and obtained a $5,000 budget to test the effects of common preservatives used during that time on human health. For his experiment, he recruited clerks and people of lower social status as test subjects. Something important to note is that all of these test subjects were males, as Wiley, like many of the men during this time, believed that women lacked the brain capacity of men. These men were purely volunteers, as they didn't make any money out of Wiley's experiment. However, they were given 3 square meals a day and a place to sleep. Wiley had hired a chef to prepare proper meals. We were able to get our hands on a day's menu for the Poison Squad from a Washington Times newspaper from that time. For breakfast, they had codfish balls, Boston brown bread, French fried potatoes, bread and butter, coffee, and milk. For lunch, they had rice soup, apple pie, bread and butter, tea, and milk. For dinner, they had chicken, peas, celery on toast, brown sweet potatoes, bread and butter, peaches, coffee, and milk. They took oaths pledging a year of service and as a part of their contract signed away their right to sue the government before joining the Poison Squad. To appeal to his audience and entice them to join the Poison Squad, Wiley and the original members used a vast amount of propaganda. When advertising their squad, they made a conscious effort to appeal to the poorer population of America, stating that they were offering 3 meals a day and free housing for the cost of a small, safe, controlled experiment. They were largely successful in their ventures, admitting 12 people to commit to their experiments. Additionally, the media used a profound degree of propaganda when describing the Poison Squad image in order to emphasize the idea that these people were benevolent despite the unorthodox methods of Dr. Wiley. These people were shielded from the gruesome nature of these experiments and strategically exposed to the beneficial findings of Dr. Wiley and the Poison Squad. Just to reiterate, the volunteers were then given meals that contained deadly poisons such as borax, sulfuric acid, saltpeter, and copper sulfate, just to name a few. Borax, a preservative used to give meat the impression of freshness, was very prevalent in 1902. However, by eating multiple meals that contained borax, Wiley was able to record and conclude that the consumption of borax resulted in many unwarranted side effects, including but not limited to headaches, stomach aches, and various digestive issues. Through extensive testing, Wiley was also able to discern that the ingestion of copper sulfate directly leads to nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. Shockingly enough, this toxic and potent chemical was used for an incredibly trivial purpose, turning canned peas a fresher shade of green. Sulfuric acid, which as we know today is a highly corrosive chemical that could literally dissolve human flesh, commonly used today only in a handful of household products, but was also added occasionally to certain meat products to serve as a preservative and maintain freshness. However, volunteering for such a prestigious organization came with its own set of ramifications. Almost all aspects of the volunteers' physical health, including but not limited to their urine, sweat, heart rate, and weight, all had to be carefully measured before every meal to ensure a man's continuation in the squad. If a man did not eat all of the food given to him, he would have been removed from the squad. If the entire squad became ill, that meant there was a problem with the food. However, if only one person became ill, that man was removed from the poison squad. But even through sickness, even through strife, even through struggles, people were dedicated to the poison squad, most notably in the constant appraisal and the constant requests the poison squad had for admission. If that wasn't hard enough during the time of their experiments, they did not have advanced technology or the budget to afford them, with the aforementioned $5,000 budget. When compared to other lab studies during the time, Wiley's money that he received represented a small portion of the amount that the United States government gave to other researchers. As a result, they used primitive methods to collect, measure, and store the data. For example, to measure the chemical compositions of their feces, they used inefficient and questionable methods to achieve this. Despite all the severe trauma and detrimental food for many years, all but one survived their work as the Poison Squad. It was Lance Freeman, who was part of the Poison Squad, that had contracted tuberculosis shortly after his work there, and his mother, Laura Latham, believed that it was because of his ingestion of borax during Poison Squad experiments that he was unable to fight off tuberculosis. In response to such accusations, Wiley denied these allegations, but despite this, Latham decided to sue the government anyways. Latham was able to do so as the contract only binded the members of the Poison Squad, not their family. Laura ended up using the press to blame the Poison Squad for his son's death and Wiley's actions. Now let's transition to some interviews that we conducted on random strangers regarding their knowledge of the Poison Squad. We asked some people if they knew about the FDA and the Poison Squad and their correlation with each other. I'm with
Kashyap Chintakunta.
he's a random stranger I met on the street. So Kashyap, do you know what the FDA is?
It's the Federal Department of Agriculture, right?
No, it's actually the Food and Drug Agency.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah, so what they basically do is they make sure that your food and drugs are safe to consume. And like they make sure it's not filled with any like dangerous chemicals or anything like that.
Right.
Okay, so if the FDA didn't exist, what do you think your food would be filled with?
Man, that's some dangerous stuff, like chemicals, poison, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was like. During the 1900s,
Oh,
our
really?
food is filled with chemicals like borax, copper sulfate, formaldehyde. So what do you think it would be like for the people living during that time?
Man, they must have gotten sick a lot.
Yeah, they did. So Kashyap, would you voluntarily eat poisoned food 3 times a day in the name of a science experiment?
No, why would I?
Well, that's what the Poison Squad did. Do you know what the Poison Squad is?
The Poison Squad? No, I've never heard of them.
Okay, so basically the Poison Squad were a group of men who ate poisoned meals to prove that the companies were filling the food with harmful chemicals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I am with...
Kinsey Che.
Okay, so Kenzie, do you know what the FDA is?
No.
Okay, so the FDA is the Food and Drug Agency. Basically what they do is they make sure that your food and drugs are safe to consume and they're not filled with any harmful chemicals or poisons. What do you think about that?
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay, so what do you think your food would be like if the FDA didn't exist?
Maybe I would get sick more often, and probably a lot of other people too.
Spot on. Did you know during the 1900s that your food was filled with stuff like formaldehyde, copper sulfate, and borax?
No.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I would have second guessed every bite I took.
So, Kenzie, would you voluntarily eat 3 poison meals a day in the name of a science experiment?
Of course not.
Well, that's what the Poison Squad is. Do you know what the Poison Squad is?
No.
Well, the Poison Squad were a group of men who voluntarily ate poison meals in the name of science to prove that the food at that time was filled with detrimental chemicals. What do you think about that?
That's pretty brave. I have to leave.
I'm with Arpita, a random stranger I've met on the street. So, Arpita, do you know what the FDA is?
No. What is it?
Well, the FDA is the Food and Drug Agency. Basically, what they do is they make sure that your food and drugs are safe to consume. So, what do you think would happen what would your food be filled with if the FDA did not exist?
I guess the companies would get to add whatever they want and there will be no control.
Okay. Well, do you know during the time 1900s, the food was filled with corrosive acids such as copper sulfate and borax?
Seriously?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Would you eat 3 poison meals a day in the name of a science experiment?
No, why would I do that?
Well, that's what the Poison Squad did. Do you know what the Poison Squad is?
No.
Well, basically, they were a group of 12 men that ate 3 poison meals a day to test out if the chemicals that food companies were putting, if they were harmful.
That is worse than a soldier's role. You know you are eating poison, so it's bad.
Yeah, and they did it in the name of science and saved so many lives.
Wow.
Seems like not a lot of people are aware of the Poison Squad. History classes tend to cover up some of America's dark history, including the advent of voluntary poison testing on American citizens. It is up to us as historians to uncover the truth and let it be known to the public. The heroes of the Poison Squad should be remembered for their actions in revolutionizing the food industry, making food safe to consume. Their pain and suffering should not be in vain, and we should be inspired by their actions to make sure today's food industry is making food safe for us to eat. I'd like to thank Jim Lee for his efforts in researching. Thanks to Akshay for leading this team and helping us out in all departments. Thanks to Sahas Ramanandan for designing the website. And thanks to Shekar Balasubramanian for editing and mixing the podcast. Thank you for listening.